And I think it would be helpful for our listeners because I don't think many of them really have gone into depth into Robert Cialdini's work and influence. So I think it'd be really helpful to maybe go through each one of his the 7 areas. So I think that obviously reciprocity, liking, social proof, authority, scarcity, commitment, and consistency, and finally unity, which was added to the list in 2016 when Dr. Cialdini wrote Persuasion. Would you mind just going quickly through those? Because I think it'd be really helpful for our listeners to have a better insight on this.
Sure. Let me quickly give the backstory that Dr. Cialdini was a Regents Professor Emeritus at Arizona State University, where he taught for more than 3 decades. He's retired, but he still travels the world and talks on this subject. When he was early on in his career, he had an instinct that said, if we really want to understand the social influence process, we can't confine it to a laboratory and basically a lot of college students. We've got to get out into the real world. So he took almost a 3-year hiatus from teaching, and he went out and got jobs, selling cars, working at electronic stores, making phone calls before the do not call list days, and doing what he could to sell. But he wanted to learn what the literature said, and he wanted to learn from people who he saw as very successful at influencing others. And then after that 3 years, he stepped back and he looked at everything that he had learned, and he combined it with his understanding of the influence process through all of his years of study and research. And he said, you know what, there are really 6 principles, now a 7th, but at the time, 6 universal principles that people all across the globe tend to respond to in one way or another. And so he coined the term, the principles of influence or principles of persuasion. Now, these have been around as long as human beings have been alive. He didn't discover the principle of reciprocity, but he did codify all this and put it into language where people could say, wow, that makes sense. I can use that. So he had the 6 principles originally, and as you said, in 2016, he introduced a 7th principle called unity. So did you want me to go through and talk very quickly about each?
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, Brian, just to give a quick overview of them.
Okay, so the principle of liking says that we prefer to say yes to those we know and like. And now everybody listening to this podcast or watching it is like, well, duh, we all know that. But what people don't do a lot of times is strategically think about how to use that to get others to say yes and help them in several ways. So that's the first principle. The next one is reciprocity. Reciprocity is that natural feeling, that obligation that we feel to give to others who first give to us. So when we do something that's genuinely beneficial for another person, very often they will be more willing to do something if we need their help. And then we go to social proof, also sometimes called consensus in some of the writing. And social proof is just about how humans tend to look to others to see how they should behave in different situations. We are social creatures. So when we see lots of people doing something or people who are just like us, we tend to move in that direction. We take that as a cue that that's probably the right thing to do. Authority is all about expertise. We defer to people that we look at as having superior wisdom or expertise. So the more somebody knows that you have expertise, the more likely they are to say yes to you. And then we come to commitment and consistency. This principle says that we feel this internal psychological pressure, but also an external social pressure to be consistent in what we say and do. And I really like to boil it down to this, Harsha: word and deed. Most people feel better about themselves when their words and deeds line up. So if we can get them to commit to something, they are more likely to do it as opposed to us telling them what to do. And then there was scarcity, that we value things more when we believe they are rare or diminishing, if they're going away. So once we know that that thing might be more difficult to obtain, there's just something natural. We feel it in our gut. We just want that thing more. So again, as an ethical influencer, we want to make sure that if something is rare or limited, that we alert people to that, because it will make it easier for them to say yes, but on the assumption that what we're offering is in their best interest, they don't want to miss out on it. So those were the 6 principles that he originally introduced back in the mid-'80s with his book, Influence, Science, and Practice. And then in 2016, he introduced a 7th principle called unity. So a lot of people ask the question, well, why did it take you so long to introduce this principle? And he typically says, it was there all along, but I didn't see it because it was just kind of lurking under the surface. But unity is about shared identity, that it's easier for us to say yes to those who are of us, of our tribe, maybe within our family. An example here in the United States, my father served in the Marines. From the time I was a little boy, I could always tell when Dad met another Marine, it seemed like he was closer to them than me, his own flesh and blood. And that's because of the deep connection, the bond that they share. So that's a quick overview of the 7 principles.